Hello there, I'm Carrie Baldwin, and after a long hiatus, much longer than I wanted, Dare to Think and Flashes of Liberty will be returning. I've learned so much during this time, and I hope that it all serves as improvements to the content I provide. I know many of you who listened to my previous episodes are eager to hear my third episode concerning libertarianism and abortion, and I promise you it's coming. It's in production as we speak. I will be making some changes to the format of the podcast so that I can keep it active, but I don't want to produce poorly thought out content. I want to ensure that what I bring to you is top quality, and sometimes that means allowing things to take time. So in between Dare to Think episodes, I plan to add some interviews of people challenging paradigms in their own spheres. Some will be libertarian, some won't be. Of those who are not, I'm going to try and draw out of their stories libertarian ideas that they may not have realized were there. Like today's guest, Paul Jarvis. I've been following Paul's work for the past 2 years. His approach to business online is quite appealing to me, and I've applied some of his ideas to my own work. He has a new book coming out on January 15th called Company of One, where he challenges the idea of business growth for its own sake. And while we don't talk about libertarianism itself, we did discuss concepts like trade and specialization, automation freeing us from repetitive tasks to do more creative work. Paul even watched the animated film iPencil prior to the interview, so we talked about that too. So while we wait for final production of my next episode, please join me today as we dare to think about Paul Jarvis's Company of One. Hello, Paul. I'm glad to talk to you today about your new book, Company of One. I'm actually really excited for it to come out. Why don't you first tell us a little bit about you and why you decided to write the book?
Sure. So, as you said, Paul Jarvis, internet person. So I started out, I've been working for myself for 20 years. I started out as a designer and online consultant. So I was doing client work pretty much. And then probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I decided to shift into products. So things like books and courses and software. And I haven't looked back from that, thankfully. I was scared when I made the move from client work to product work. But I'm glad that it worked out. And the book, why I decided to write the book was because I guess I always thought that I was a weirdo. The best way to describe why I thought I was weird because while my business has always done well, I always felt pressure from other people to grow it. So when I was doing client work, people would tell me, well, you do good work. You're always booked 4, 6, 8 months in advance. Like, hire some designers, hire some developers, hire some writers, project managers and stuff. And I was like, I don't want to promote myself out of the job I like. I actually do like doing design and writing and talking to clients. And so I realized like maybe growth is not the next step when your business succeeds. Maybe there's something else, even though kind of what we're shown in the media and in the news and especially in like entrepreneurial startup world is, hey, if your business does well, you grow it. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the way that it works. And I was like, hi.
Right.
Maybe that's not the case. And I thought I was honestly, I thought that I was alone in that. Like I thought I was the only one who thought like this, which is why I said I felt like a weirdo.
Yeah.
But I started to write about it. And I wrote an article for my mailing list, the Sunday Dispatches, it was something like why I don't want to grow my business. And I was inundated with replies. So hundreds of people were like, I thought I was the only one. And then I'm like, there's a club here. Right. And then I figured this is worth investigating. Basically, this is worth a couple years of my life researching, interviewing, and and making into book form. So that's kind of the genesis of it.
Cool. Yeah, I found out about you by word of mouth through another blogger that follows you. And what I found really interesting about your website and also Sunday Dispatches was the absence of all the fluff that you normally see on websites and sales pages. And that was sort of, what I wanted to do for myself. I didn't want it to be this big monolith. So I'm wondering how much of your mindset is geared towards providing a service and improving upon that service rather than merely just driving sales.
Yeah, I think so. In business, profits required. Like
Hmm.
otherwise, it's not a business. And I mean, I do lots of things that give me zero monetary value that I love, which I called hobbies.
Right.
Hobbies are kind of important, but because this is how I support myself and my family, like there does need to be a sales aspect to it. But I found that it doesn't need to be. I mean, this just keeps coming up in everything that I do, is that things don't have to be done a certain way for them to work.
Right.
For my website, it doesn't need, say, pop-up modals with like sign up unless you hate puppies, or just like ridiculous things.
Right.
Like it doesn't. I would rather. And what I found that I don't really hear anybody talk about is the fact that you can kind of create and you can foster a relationship with the type of audience that you want. You're
Hmm.
not given you don't make something and then you're given an audience. You can be intentional with what you're creating and who you're creating it specifically for. So
Hmm.
I feel like, one, I think my audience is smart and they don't need me to shove things down their throat. Like if they're going to buy something, great, they're going to buy it. That supports my business, and in turn, what I sell them provides value. If they don't buy, that's fine. I've had some people on my mailing list, because I've done my mailing list for 6 years. I had some people on my list for 4 years, and then they buy something for $300, and I'm like, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
maybe they buy something in a week, maybe they buy something years later. I've been in business for 20 years. I want to be in business 20 more.
Hmm.
I like playing the long, like I don't mind playing the long game. I don't mind fostering relationships. I don't mind building an audience of people who are okay with the fact that, yes, I'm going to sell things, but I'm going to sell them in my way. And I'm not going to, like, I don't have to be pushy about it. Like I can just talk. Like the other thing, like I'm not smart enough to be somebody else. Like I'm not smart enough to put on an act, or like, oh,
Right.
this salesperson, Paul, now I have to be a certain, it's like, I really just know how to be Paul, and that is it. So I
Yeah.
talk to my audience like humans, because I would want them to talk to me the same way. I would want the people where I'm an audience member of somebody else's audience, to talk to me just like a human being. And it works.
Yeah.
Like, it actually does work. You don't need to be pushy or do things the exact same way as every other blogger on the
Right.
planet does things.
Right. Yeah. So the thesis of your book, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like the thesis of your book is that blind growth is the main cause of business problems, and that staying small can be a smart end goal or business strategy.
Yeah.
Um, so this actually reminds me, and even what you were just describing reminds me of the concept of the small mom and pop business. Before the internet came around. And so it sounds like staying small allows you to maintain a personal feel to your business, and that's what's been important for your own success in your business.
For sure. And I think that it's funny too, like if you look at the grand scheme of commerce across the start of civilization, which is
Hmm.
pretty much when commerce started, to now, big corporations are this tiny little blip on
Hmm.
our timeline. And they haven't existed for a very, like, it was really only like Henry Ford era and beyond where big corporations started to come into play. And even then, like there were very specific things that were required, and economies of scale that were required to make big corporations work better than small companies in some regards. I feel like we're past that. I
Hmm.
feel like, and throughout the book and throughout the research that I did for the book, I found that what we're told in the media about growth being good and like scale this, 10x this, it doesn't line up with the data and the people who are studying business. So there are two studies that I found initially when I was looking at writing the book, that I was like, I'm onto something with this thesis, that better is better, more isn't better. Otherwise, more would be the same as better.
Right.
And the first one was Startup Genome Project. They looked at, I think, 3,200 businesses, and they found that 74% of them failed, not because of the market or because they had crappy products or anything, but because they scaled too fast. They were outspending what their actual profit was in hopes of getting more profit. And I was like, that kind of makes sense. Like not spending more than you're making now. And then another one, my favorite one, it's so funny to have like a favorite study. I'm a nerd, so it's okay. Was the Kaufman like there's this on Inc. magazine, they have a list that the like top 5, the Inc. 5000 list, where it's like the best and brightest companies of the year, right. And people want to be on that list. So Kaufman Foundation did a follow-up study on this list. I think it was 5 to 8 years later, and found that 2/3 of those people, the best companies in the world at that time, 2/3 of them had gone into business for the same reasons as the Startup Genome Project, which was scaling too fast. And so they'd either gone into business, sold below market value, or had to severely downsize, which is horrible for morale of a company.
Right.
And I'm like, this is like, why is nobody talking about this? Why is everybody talking about like 10xing this or growing this or scaling this? I'm like, what if we don't need to do that? And so I think the back to your question about blind growth, I think that it's probably not required. Like I think that capitalism or even money works to a point, right? It makes sense that if you're making $0, you need to make some money to live, to pay rent, to pay for like putting food on the table, to put your kids through whatever schooling you want, if you want to put them in school at all. And so I think that like you do need some money. And there was a study, sorry, I said 2 studies. This is the bonus study. World Gallup poll looked at, it was almost like 2 million people across the globe, so not just in the States or Canada. They looked at optimal emotional well-being in terms of earning. So what you made lined up with how happy and content you were with your life. And they found that absolutely you were happier as you made more money up to a point.
Yeah.
Up to a point. And then past that point, you were either just as happy making more money or you were more unhappy. So it's almost like a bell curve where you're happier if you're just getting by, you're happier as you make more money, so you can be more comfortable in your life and you can cover your bases. But past a certain point, and the point wasn't even millions of dollars. Okay? It was like, I think it was like 70-ish K US.
Wow.
And then to be like, that was the minimum for emotional well-being, like optimizing emotional well-being in terms of earning. And then the top of it was, the high figure was under 100K. It was like 95 or something, where that was ideal for life evaluation, taking into account like long-term goals and savings, even taking into account like dealing with peer comparisons, which is huge, which we could even talk about, and like macro level metrics of things. And it's like, if that's all we need to be happy, and sure, it changes. Like one of my friends has 4 kids. I have no kids. We need different amounts of money.
Sure.
That's just the way that it goes. But if we don't consider what enough is, if we don't consider like maybe there is an optimal earning place for us, then we don't need to beat ourselves up for needing more or comparing ourselves to our neighbors or our neighbor digital businesses. And so I think that it just I feel like that thinking about enough, and enough is different for everybody, feels like the counterbalance or the antithesis of this like never ending hunger for more that capitalism and consumerism kind of installs in us from a very young age.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. Those studies are really interesting. I've heard them cited elsewhere. So this isn't the first time that I've heard them.
I'm glad other people are talking about them, not just me.
Okay, so I want to switch gears just a little bit, because you also have a podcast by the same name, Company of One. And on there you sort of discuss a little bit about what Company of One is not, which is solopreneurship, which is, sort of a buzzword that's become popular, and also freelancing. So can you talk about how what you're talking about in the book is different from those two things?
Yeah, and I think it's so like I'm very stress and responsibility adverse in my business. So I understand that if I earn enough money, then I don't worry about money. Then I'm not stressed out about money, and that's a good thing. And so I think that if we're looking at, so there's most, like, I can't think of very many word mashups that I actually like. So
Yeah.
solopreneur is just another one. It's like mompreneur. It's like, you're just an entrepreneur. It
Right.
doesn't, you are other things in your life, and that's cool. But you work for yourself, or you're a business owner, a small business owner, or whatever. So I
Right.
think it's just kind of weird. Like, these word mashups are just weird. So to speak to the solopreneur specifically, it's hard to be good at all of the things you need in a business.
Hmm.
So I'm good at, like, generating revenue and profit for my business. I'm not good at telling my government how much I should give them based on, like, the income that I have. It's funny, when I started, I was like, well, if I make for some reason I thought taxes were very easy, which is, like, I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but it kind of works very similarly, where there's a different, like, if you have a good accountant, especially if you run a business, they're going to get you perfectly legal and above the board a way to pay as little money as possible to the government, because I like making money. I don't want to give the government more than I have to.
Right.
I understand how taxes work. I like taxes. I like the social systems that my country has, but I don't want to give more than, like, I already give them a lot of money. So
Sure.
having a good accountant is one example of, like, you don't have to work by yourself if you work for yourself. And
Hmm.
so I think having, like, good accountant is key, good bookkeeper, a lawyer, should you need that, even just a lawyer that's not on retainer, a lawyer that you can, like, I think I pay my lawyer a couple $100 a year, and he does my year end, because in Canada, a legal requirement is that there's an AGM. I've never been to one of my AGMs. He sends me the document and charges me the money, and I'm just like, cool, we met the requirement that's legally required for the government of Canada, done. But I also, in that couple $100 a year, he's like, if you have a question that takes me less than 10 minutes to answer, I'll do it, and I don't charge you more money. And I'm like, you're the best
Nice.
lawyer ever. Because most lawyers charge you for staples in your
Right.
facts.
Yep.
But, like, these kind of lawyers exist where, like, he understands that he wants to have this relationship. And as I need things that take more than 10 minutes, I gladly pay him for them, because I pick his brain, not even very often, a few times a year. I also think that it's okay. And I think when we're talking about a company of one, I think that it's not a literal definition. So just like solopreneurism, I think, is sort of a myth. I think that company of one, the title, is more of a mindset, in so much as Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week he never meant you to work 4 hours a week from a beach or whatever's on the title.
Right.
It's a mindset to adopt, to start to think that maybe growth isn't always required, or that less can be bad. I mean, I think it was Dieter Rams in the 70s, like, his famous quote, the guy who did all of the Braun designs, like the iconic
Mm.
consumer products, and that Apple was really based off of. His famous quote was, like, less but better. Like, that's
Hmm.
very, very smart. And so solopreneurism, I don't think, is true, because I don't think anybody is truly a one person. Like, I don't think anybody can just be an island of a business. They need
Right.
help. And
Right.
that's totally fine. You're allowed to get help. It's your business. You make the rules. And then as it relates to freelancing, I think that freelancing is the perfect start to building that. But you're still, regardless of whether you charge by the hour or by deliverable or by value, you're still trading time for money. So
Hmm.
you're still, if you're not doing work, you're not getting paid.
Hmm.
And where I think freelancing is a fine long-term solution. Like, I did that for 12 years or so, and I could have kept doing it. I just wanted something different because I got I got bored.
Right.
But I think, as it relates to the compare and contrast of company of one, is that I think companies of one eventually need to focus on products, because products do separate time from revenue. So
Mm.
you do the work up front, and in the hopes that you will make money off of that. I mean, some people call it passive income, which I also think is a horrible term,
Hmm.
because it's not really passive. You're just separating time from revenue.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's what products are, right? Like, you do the work, you make the product, and then you sell it, and you can sell that at a scale. And
Uh-huh.
if you do it in kind of the way that I do it, or a lot of small businesses online do it, is you can scale it without growing. So it takes me just as long to write one email to you like an article and send it to you via email as it does for me to write one article and send it to my entire mailing list.
Right.
Or it takes me just as long to make a product or like an online course or a software product that I sell to one person as it does to make something that I sell to 1,000 or 10,000 people. So there can be some scale that happens without necessarily, like I don't need a team of 50 to increase my revenue should I want to increase my revenue. I just need to come up with smarter ways to solve the problems in my business without adding more. Because I think adding more is the easiest way to solve any business problem. It's like there's a problem, just add more to the solution, and hooray, you solved it.
Yeah.
But it can be smarter and more ingenious and more creative and more durable if we solve the problems in our business, one, with what we've got, because it sometimes is a solution with what we have, and two, if we come up with solutions that might require a bit of upfront work, but we can solve without adding more to them for the future. So one example of that, because it's a bit nebulous in my answer, is if somebody's always asking the same support request for a product that I have, I could hire I could hire a support person, not another because I do all the support.
Right.
I guess another because I'm number one. So I could hire another person, which is how a lot of traditional businesses do it. Or I could think about what are the patterns in the support requests that I'm currently getting? How can I answer those questions before I'm sent an email or called about that question? So maybe I make a knowledge base, maybe I write some articles, maybe I make some videos, maybe I can better onboard people to the things that I'm selling. So I teach them at the point of purchase how to use them so they require less support and less of my time. And then I don't have to hire somebody. And ultimately that could be cheaper over time and provide me with less responsibility in my life, which I like.
So yeah. One of the things that you talk about, and I think you're describing here, is using automations to, to solve some of your problems in your own business and to free up your time, but to also, take away that 1-to-1, money-making ratio. And yet, some people are afraid that by using automations, you're taking jobs away from people. But do you think that this actually opens up the opportunity for more people to develop their creative power and contribute to society in ways that we couldn't conceive of before?
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, the White House in the previous administration released a report on the future of work and spoke to robotics and automation as a potential destroyer of human jobs. So the government of Canada released a similar report. They're probably cheating off each other, to be honest. They're very similar reports written by very actually similar governments at the time. But I do think that I think our value as like a human workforce isn't the fact that we can do repetitive tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're certainly capable of that, but I think our value, and I think the value of a small business or a company of one or whatever we want to call it, is in how we creatively solve problems, is how we use our ingenuity. And I think that's probably, I don't know how that's replicated. Like every time I ask my phone something that requires any modicum of like creativity to answer the question, Siri tells me that it doesn't understand me.
Mm-hmm.
And we could come to a time when there's a robot flipping burgers at McDonald's, which that could definitely take some jobs for people who work in those situations. But I think it could also free up time to be able to come up with different solutions for things. And I think that if we rely on repetitive tasks for our job, we're always at risk of somebody who can just do that thing faster taking our job, whether it's a robot or a human.
Mm-hmm.
But if we become the person that solves problems well, I don't see how a computer or a robot, at least anytime soon, could replace us, because it's very it's just, I just don't see a time when that can happen. And I think that's really, I didn't even talk about this in the book and reference those studies that I cited, where I think that now is the time to be fostering our creativity. And I think a lot of things are more creative than we give them credit for. Like my accountant is creative in that she comes up with creative but legal to move the money that I've made around into different, but like you just call it a different thing and you owe the government something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe you could teach a machine to do that. And I know there are like automated ways to file taxes online, but the way that a human does it is still better and saves me money. And like, I'd still rather hire a person. And I mean, like, and that's really what I think business is at a lot of levels. And this is getting a bit off track, but I do think that it's important is that business, one, is all about personal networks, regardless of what level of business you're at. Like when I was working with like Microsoft and Mercedes, I didn't get to work with them through anything other than I had relationships with people, business relationships with people who basically could make introductions or who knew that I was doing good work. And it was all about personal connections. And like all of the work that I've ever got in my entire life has been personal connections, not because of some like growth hack or some automation sequence. And I think those kind of things like automations 100% have a place, but not if we lose sight of all personal interaction. And I mean, even for me, who's the biggest email automation nerd on the planet, like when I open up a course or when I send, like any email I send goes to my email address, my personal email address. Nobody sees it. Nobody replies to it except me. And I feel like it's my job when I'm in the middle of a launch to be a human being. Like if people have questions, I answer questions. If people, and I think a lot of times people, especially in the sort of products that I put out into the world, at first I was like, I don't know why people are emailing me these questions. Like they're answered on the website. But then I started to think about it and I started to see that like people just wanted to see that there's a human being on the other end. That if they're buying something, they're not just buying it from a robot. And if they have questions or issues or want help, it's like does not compute. Like, Siri, I'm sorry, I don't understand your request. They want to see that there's a human being on the other end. And I'm a human being, luckily. Yeah. So I can just answer the email like a regular human being and sometimes tell them, hey, this product isn't right for you. Or, hey, I think this product is right for you. I had some hilariously interesting conversations with people when I'm selling something. And I mean, my automation sequence takes care of all of the questions that I've answered repetitively, but then it opens me up to the create. So I'll share one story only because it's like, I think it's the most interesting thing that's ever happened during a sales sequence. So I sell a course called Creative Class. It teaches the business of freelancing. And it talks a lot about what we're talking about here, like business relationships, and the power of connection, the power of referral, the power of word of mouth. And a woman emailed me and she was like, I think I want to take the course. I don't know if it's right for me. I understand what you're saying about referrals and the strength of word of mouth, but she's like, my job is that I'm a death doula. And so if I do my job correctly, I'd never even heard of this. I was like, you're blowing my mind with the work that you do.
Yeah.
He was like, if I do my job well, my client's dead at the end. Like they passed away. I help them transition from life to death. I cannot get a referral from my clients because they have died. She's like, I don't know if this course is right for me. And like, how does a robot answer that?
Right.
There's no way. I don't even think I could answer that well, to be honest. Like I had a further conversation with her just to see if it was a good fit. But like things like that, like I don't think we can train a non-human to be able to answer things like that. Plus, that's like, who wouldn't want to get an email like that? To me, that was the most exciting thing that happened. I guess this was probably 3 years ago, and I still remember that story vividly. I still remember talking to that woman vividly.
Wow.
Just like, this is why I'm in business, so I can like have these human conversations with other people. And it's just so interesting. Like, I'm so fascinated by the work that she does, and now I've learned a bit about death doula-ing.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay. So before we did the interview, I asked you to watch a short video called iPencil. What did you think about it?
It was so interesting. And I think it's so like, I hadn't thought about that. And I hadn't thought about like, in my mind, I'm just like, there's a company, they make pencils. And it's impossible for as I watched in the video, it's impossible for one company to mine the materials, to cut down the trees, probably in my area, because like I live in a second growth forest, so they have already harvested all of the cedar trees, but more have grown up in the 60 years since they just clear cut everything. it's just, yeah, it was interesting. And I think about even the stories in the book where I talk to small businesses who they now, the based on the way that globalization works, like obviously there's definitely some bad thing. I'm a huge fan of Naomi Klein, so I know the downside of globalization for sure, but I do see that businesses are making connections and selling things without having to do all of the steps,
Right.
while still connecting with businesses in other parts of the world that ethically do manufacturing, and they make sure the supply chain lines up with their values and ideals about work, and maybe they spend more, but then consumers, which has very much been shown, are willing to spend more if they understand the life cycle of a product and the supply chain of a product. So like my friend Jeff, who runs Ugmonk, he's basically the brand, and he sells like t-shirts and desk things and like coasters, and they're all gorgeous, they're all beautifully, they're all very well made. Most of them are made local to him in the United States, and if they're not, they're made in places that pay their workers well, that treat their workers fair, that he's just done gobs of research to ensure this, and that they line up. He does a lot of charity work as well with the profits that he makes, and like he doesn't need to like grow the cotton and make the shirt and print the shirt, and he can basically run a business that does very well doing one step in that chain. Just like the pencil, you can do one step in a chain. And this is the way that business has always worked, is that it's just all of these interconnected smaller businesses working together to develop things that customers need.
Right.
I just think that it's smart and it makes sense.
Yeah, it seems to me that part of staying small means focusing and refining whatever it is that you're specializing in. And, though we may try and guess how we'd like to, our product or service to affect the market or affect the world around us, we can't really imagine how others will use our products or services. Like, you were talking about the example with the death doula. I mean, how many times have you run into people who have, signed up for a course or have interacted with you through your Sunday dispatches where you're like, I couldn't have imagined this person actually, purchasing a service from me.
Yeah, all the time. I'm constantly surprised and impressed by the caliber and difference of humans who I get to interact with, and I think that's part of building and fostering an audience that I actually want to have, because like I like that interaction. Like I really like the fact that I can send an email to my mailing list and it's big enough to support me financially and my family financially, but it's not so big that I have to send from something like no reply at Paul Jarvis, or I get inundated with so many emails that I can't reply. Like I get probably 200 or 300 replies to my Sunday emails. That's manageable for me. I can sit down in a few hours, answer any questions that people have, talk to people that I need to, and that's like it's enough. Like there's just like that Gallup poll that we spoke about in the beginning, where there's kind of like an enough space, and I think that that's so important to determine for each of us, because it's different for each of us. So knowing that, I know that I don't need to. In the beginning, I needed to adopt a growth mindset because I needed to grow my list because of 0 people, and so I needed to grow it to a place where it would support me because my list generates the bulk of my income. So I needed to grow it to a place where it would make enough money for my business to be profitable and therefore durable. But past a certain point, I would lose what I like about it, and also what gives me what I need to make my business sustain itself, because through those interactions, I get to learn a great deal about my audience as well. Like I get to learn what they're working on, what they're struggling with, what they want from me. And I can make those into maybe other articles or podcasts. I can make those into paid products. Like I use that interaction to guide the way and the direction that my business goes. And that's so supremely helpful to me that if it grew beyond the scale and scope of that, I honestly, I don't know how I would do that. I would probably have to hire like a market research firm and
Right.
those sound expensive.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so last question. As a single mom, I've personally found your approach to business quite valuable because it's taking something that appears to be a giant monolith and is breaking it down to something that I can manage. Now, many people are finding ways to freelance in what they're calling the gig economy, which I think is great. But of course, as a single mom, I want to be able to free up my own time. So being able to take that one to one ratio, that time for money model, and move it into profiting outside the time that you're working is something that gives average people more freedom, which is what we all want. So what would you say is the best step a freelancer could take toward becoming a company of one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that's something I think the first part of that is smart because I think, like I said, working services first, I think makes a lot of sense. Like you get that one-to-one connection with an audience and you need to learn from them. You need to learn what people want to make something that they're going to buy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that step one is starting in services. Even through the people that I interviewed for the book, most of them that have successful product businesses started in services. I did too. Probably didn't need to stay in services as long as like I probably could have started products earlier,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't, and I didn't really mind working in services. But I think the things you need to think about to make that switch would be the following. So I think the first thing would be that it's okay to go slowly. Like I think it took 2.5 years or so to move fully from services to products. It wasn't like an overnight switch. And I think that we're kind of sold this bill of goods that entrepreneurialism is inherently risky. And I don't think that smart entrepreneurs are risky. Most entrepreneurs I know are not risky.
Huh.
So I think saying like, I quit my freelancing job, like no clients from here on out. Now I'm going to start making products tomorrow is inherently risky.
Right.
I don't know how to do that and ensure success. Nobody does.
Right.
Business is more of a like magic 8-ball or Zoltar machine than anything.
Right.
So I think going slowly is a good first step. Is trying to think like, okay, what trends have I noticed in the work that I've done one to one? Like, what do people keep asking me? What do people keep wanting from me? What are the trends that I'm seeing in where I can provide the most value that people are willing to pay me for? Like, if you can see a demand, it's an existing demand. It's easier than creating a demand.
Mm-hmm.
It's just easy. Business is hard. Where you can find easy steps, do those easy steps.
Right.
That I think is really smart. And then slowly, like I started my first product, I spent $0 on, because at the time I just like to do weird life experiments. So at the time I was spending no money except for gas and groceries. And I was like, I'm going to write a book. It's a cookbook. One, I have very ugly plates because my wife and I we don't eat for Instagram. Like I honestly don't care what our plates and cutlery look like. And I was doing a cookbook, and the photos do have to look good in a cookbook.
Hmm.
So I borrowed, one of my friends was a pastry chef at a 5-star restaurant. So I'm like, dude, can I borrow some stuff? He's like, yeah, just bring it back and we're fine.
Yeah.
I traded the editor. So I spent $0 on this book. I traded the editor. She needed some web design work. So I'm like, hey, I can do some website work for you if you edit my book. She was like, sure. The photographer, I was like, if you want to eat all the food you photograph, we can do the paper. He was like, sure. So I started, like my first product cost me nothing. It took probably a few weeks. And it was based on demand, because at the time I realized, like, I feel like a lot of my writing is based on laziness. So I felt like I needed to be lazy because people were constantly asking me for vegan recipes.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just have to type them out. Like I was typing like 10-page emails to people. So I'm like, if you want to try vegan, like, I'm not going to tell anybody to go vegan, but if you want to try it, then I'll help.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, I've written this email like 50 times now. And like, I could be lazy and again, this is like automation, right? Coming back to an earlier conversation. I'm like, I could automate this, turn it into a book. There's demand for it that I don't need to generate.
Mm-hmm.
I can start small. I think it probably has like 30, right? It's like a very small book. had like 30 recipes. It didn't take me long to make. I could put it out into market. I could get it launched quickly. Didn't cost me very much money or any money. I think I bought a domain name, so it technically cost me $12. And I could get it into market and I could see how it did. And a lot of times with products, you can do all your diligence and you can be as smart as you can, but until something's in market, you're basically guessing at everything.
Right.
So if you can get something in a market quickly, then that's a good thing. And then you can iterate. Like no one product lives or dies on the first launch. It's very, very difficult to, one, have a successful first launch, and two, have it be the most profitable. So you're going to probably launch a product several times. Every time you launch, you're going to pay attention, you're going to iterate. So I think if you're moving from services to products, it's okay to start with something small. Like don't spend a year building something in hopes that it's going to sell, or quit your freelance job to work for a year on this, even if you've saved up money. I don't think that's the smartest way to go. Like make something that you can make like evenings and weekends for a week or two. Put it out, see how it does. I even kept track of my income in separate silos. So what I was making freelancing versus what I was making in products. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to move into products, then it needs to make as much or more as I'm making in services, but it has to require less time. Because if I'm making more money, but it's taking more time, I'm not really making more money, and I've not really done that separation of time and money very well.
Right.
So that's, I think, probably the smartest way to go about it, is to start small, to listen, empathize with the people you're already talking to, get to know them. And then, just start building and iterating and building. Like I've been doing this for years now, and it's still the exact same process of listening, iterating, building, listening, iterating, building, forever, for eternity.
Excellent. That was great advice. Okay, so Company of One is getting published when? It's coming out?
January 15, North America, Jan 17 in the rest of the world.
Okay, cool. So very good. I'm going to put a direct link to your book in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to say or talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great conversation. And mentioning the book is great. I appreciate it. And I mean, if you like kind of the things that that you and I have been talking about, then check out my newsletter as well, the Sunday Dispatches, pjrbs.com, or Google Paul Jarvis. It's hard to remember the domain name that I have.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's the best. I send out an article a week.
Yep. I have to say I love the Sunday Dispatches. So definitely sign up for those. They're worth it.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Paul, for taking the time to chat today. I really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it, Carrie. Thank you very much.
If you're interested in learning more about the concepts we discussed today, I've included links for further reading in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more about Paul Jarvis's Company of One, there is a purchase link to his book on Amazon in the show notes. Using this affiliate link also supports my work here with the podcast.